We're calling all writers, storytellers, and creators of tales of the paranormal and supernatural. Do you have a spine-tingling story that's too chilling to keep to yourself? If the answer is yes, then wherever you are in the world, the Haunted UK Fiction Podcast wants to hear from you. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for storytelling, this is your chance to share your work with a global audience of listeners who crave the eerie, the unexplained, the otherworldly. We're looking for original fictional short stories or novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Your stories can be suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix, and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. There are no fees, no contracts, and no hidden jargon. Your story deserves to be heard. Whether it's a tale that's been haunting your notebook for years, or maybe something that you're finally ready to unleash, this is your chance to bring it to life. To submit your story for consideration, email us at hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. And don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories, and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors, and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading 27, which was sent in to us by Alice Griffiths. Alice's inspiration for 27 was taken from the legend of the 27 Club, where musicians such as Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, to name a few, died at the age of 27, some under strange circumstances. She's fascinated by old stories of deals made with the devil at the crossroads, as well as being a music rock fan, and was inspired to write a modern-day tale incorporating these themes. Alice is a huge fan of TV shows The X-Files and Supernatural, and loves all things strange, unexplained, mysterious, and peculiar. She enjoys reading works by Anne Rice, Stephen King, Joe Hill, and Glenn Duncan, among others. She also finds true-life accounts of the unexplained fascinating. Now, get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way. And let's dive into the story. "Bullshit!" exclaimed the raspy voice of the lead character from TV's Poker Face, blaring from the surround sound speakers. "Exactly!" Johnny Kane shouted out loud to himself, pointing and wiggling his finger at the screen, pacing back and forth barefoot across his animal skin rug. Trying his best to brush off the uneasy feeling, that had been increasingly nagging at his gut these past few weeks. Well, these past few years, if he was honest. Bullshit was just the word to describe the ridiculous scenario playing out in his head. Bullshit for sure. He sipped on the velvet-smooth contents of his glass. A vintage bourbon, barrel-aged. Always the best for Johnny. Yeah, nobody really believed the old trope of musicians dying at the age of 27 because they'd made some sort of pact with the devil. A decade of fame for an eternity of their soul service to hell? No, that really was bullshit. Guitar God, that's what it said on one of the trophies on his bookcase. Johnny Kane reassured himself. An hour to go until the calendar turned over, and Johnny himself would hit 27. That great musician's milestone, where many a famous face is forever immortalized. Live fast and die young. But he never bought into those Faustian fables. It was all just nonsense. A great myth for writers to create stories to sell books and newsprint, and for fans to build godlike icons to worship. Symbols of youth gone wild, rebelling against society, forever young. But the more he thought about it, and the more the butterflies danced macabrely in his stomach, the more the memories of that night resurfaced. It would be 10 years ago tomorrow. He'd been following the cliched path of many a would-be musician, gigging wherever he could get a slot on a bill, slumming it on sofas, crashing the night in cars. The usual. Just him and his guitar, and the never-ending heat of the cheap joints he found himself playing in. His guitar was the most precious thing he had brought with him when he left his childhood home a year ago, age 16 and full of ambition. A black Charvel Saint-Denis. Never let him down. He was underage to be in the clubs, but he got away with it. He knew he had talent, and was a good player, and he knew one day everyone else would know just how good Johnny Kane was too. He might have been lacking in the cash department, and let's face it, Lady Luck could certainly do with chucking him a frickin' bone, but he wasn't lacking in confidence, and he wasn't lacking in talent. He could play guitar just about better than anyone he'd heard, and his singing voice was good enough to complement his playing. He finished his gig wiping his long hair out of his face, as the small number of claps from the audience members who had actually bothered listening faded into nothing, and he settled down at the bar. That was right about the time he met Duke. At least, that's what the old man called himself. Duke was an old-timer, Jamaican, with a white beard, white trilby hat, and a seemingly even whiter suit. He sat silently at the back of the smoky bar. Johnny had noticed him a few times now, and was sure he'd been at a number of the shitholes he'd played at recently. Still, that wasn't unusual. There wasn't much else to do around these parts other than sip whiskey and wait for the next night to roll around, in whatever dive you happened to find yourself in. This night, however, Duke came over after the gig and introduced himself. He remembered a casual conversation with Duke whilst the pair knocked back too many bourbons. He remembered Duke with a glint in his eyes, reminiscing about his old friend, Robert Johnson, back in the day. Hell, how old was this guy? Selling his soul to Lucifer for a slice of the big old blues pie. Yeah, everyone knew about that tall tale. He remembered laughing when Duke said that he, Johnny, could have that too if he wanted it enough. Old Nick could sign him up for a decade of decadence, and anything else Johnny truly desired, all for the small token of, just your soul. He knew it was all a joke, and he was happy to go along with it to keep the old guy entertained. He couldn't help feel sympathy for him. He must be lonely. And of course, the great Johnny Kane wasn't averse to a bit of an ego massage, he would be the first to admit. Anyway, Duke was buying the shots, so he could call the shots, right? He'd just carry on sipping on his free drinks, buying whatever the old dude was selling, for as long as the shots kept coming. The night had ended in a blur. He remembered that Duke had shaken his left hand, and that the ruby ring Duke was wearing was quite sharp on the underside, and that it had pierced his skin when Duke had squeezed his palm. Duke, seemingly not noticing the small trickle of blood that had smeared between their palms, or being too polite to acknowledge it if he had wished Johnny well, calling him friend, and said something about seeing him around before walking away and being swallowed up by the smoky haze of the bustling bar. But Johnny recalled he never did see him around. In fact, that night was the last time he saw him. He looked at the small silver scar on his palm, just under his ring finger on his left hand. It had strangely grown in size over the years, like a keloid scar, and it felt for a moment as though it were burning. He again thought back to that night and how pissed he had been that he'd injured his hand, knowing that he had an important gig the next night, and how it could affect his guitar playing. He'd heard there could be talent scouts at the venue, and he was desperate to showcase his ability. He knew it could be his big break. The world needed to see just how great Johnny Kane was. The sound of the TV and the sense of rising bile in his stomach snapped him back to the here and now. It was no use dwelling on the past. It was no use going through it all in his head again. What was that going to accomplish? It was bullshit. A joke. So what if his hand had healed quickly that next day and he was able to play? Play the best he ever had, actually. So what if the talent scouts had spotted him, signed him, and he'd made it big? He'd always known it would only be a matter of time until that happened. The riches and the fame of the past decade had been of his creation. His. It was his talent and ability that made it happen, not some old guy in a white hat in a crappy old bar, fixing some decade-long deal with the devil. Come on! The thought that he'd had 10 years of everything he'd ever dreamed of, but was now going to somehow get a visit from Lucifer's soul collector? A "come in, Johnny Kane, your time is up" call, and pay for it all with an eternity of servitude to Satan? Becoming yet another loser member of the 27 Club? Yeah. Bullshit. 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 He awkwardly chuckled to himself, trying to conjure up some levity to quash the unease he just couldn't shake. Walking past his wall of platinum discs over to his bar, he poured himself another whiskey. One more couldn't hurt. It was almost his birthday after all. He settled down in his favourite leather chair to watch the rest of the TV show. His light-hearted series would surely take his mind off things. He noticed the digital clock on the TV was now showing 0001. 27. 27 years of age. Well, here it was. His birthday. 3 firm knocks at the door suddenly jolted him out of his seat. He picked up his crystal glass and walked over to the ornate wooden door, his feet padding on the cold tiles. It would be his bandmates coming over to surprise him on his birthday, he thought. They were known for their late-night hijinks antics and probably couldn't wait until the party they had planned tomorrow. He slid the iron bolts across and eased open the heavy door, looking down at the figure in shadow on the stone step below. "Happy 27th birthday, Johnny," came a familiar, softly spoken Jamaican voice. The figure stepped forward, looking up into the beam of the porch light, a glint in his dark eyes visible from under the brim of a white trilby. "Pour one for me, will you, old friend?" That brings us to the end of this episode. We truly hope you've enjoyed this tale of making a deal with the devil and the haunting repercussions. If you would like to hear more from Alice Griffiths, you can find her and follow her on Instagram at Alice_Griffiths. Alice spelt ALIS. Additional contact information is available in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until the next time, stay safe and take care.